Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Mediatwits. I'm Mark Glaser, Executive Editor of PBS MediaShift. Today we'll be talking about what's happening at the Washington Post under the leadership of Jeff Bezos and ownership of Jeff Bezos. Ezra Klein, who ran the Wonk blog there, just left for Vox Media, and they're now launching a whole raft of new blogs, including one on public policy, helmed by Jim Tankersley, and also one on opinion that's going to be helmed by Adam Kushner from the National Journal, who's executive editor of National Journal. So the Washington Post obviously is in a hiring spree, which is really interesting for a newspaper, and we'll be talking about that in depth on today's episode. So I want to introduce our panel. We have Andrew Lee from American University. We have Claire Groden, our Mediatwits intern. We have Elise from NPR. We have Jim Tankersley from the Washington Post, right in the newsroom. We have Monica Guzman from Seattle Times and Geekwire. So Jim, tell us a little bit about the big changes going on at the Washington Post. You've been there since December 2012. There's a new owner that we've been talking about for a while, Jeff Bezos, who runs Amazon as well. There's been a lot of changes, and we've been hearing about a lot of people kind of leaving and coming. You're starting this new public policy blog. How will it differ? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of politics-related blogs now at the Post. What's this? How is this going to be different? And why should we be following it along with everything else?
Well, thanks for letting me talk about it. It's a really exciting time, actually, which is kind of a weird thing to say, working for a media organization over the last decade. But it's a really exciting time. There's a lot of hiring going on here. There's a lot of new initiatives being started. It's a time when basically people with cool new ideas are getting the chance to try them out. And I'm lucky enough to have one of the ideas that they're trying. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to reach into a different corner of the policy world, the policy audience, than, say, Wonk blog, which is going to continue. Does. What we're doing is we're looking at people who aren't necessarily hardcore policy enthusiasts who want to read every day after day installment of the Affordable Care Act, and instead asking, how can we engage readers who care about important things and important policy decisions that affect their lives, but aren't really wanting to go into that level of detail. And my answer, the answer that I think that newspapers have always been particularly good at, is we tell them stories. So we are going to have a storytelling site, and that means a lot of things. We're going to have great narrative stories that start with data-driven insights on what's going on in the world around you, and build out and put human drama at the center of those stories to engage readers. We're going to tell stories with numbers. We're going to tell stories by engaging readers in a conversation. So we're going to try to invent brand new forms of storytelling that mash all those things together. It's pretty fun, pretty exciting thing to be starting.
Yeah, and I mean, you're going to be working with there's a lot of visual elements to this. You're talking about data journalism. You're talking about really telling stories in new ways, like you said. Can you give us an example of what kind of topic you might take on and how it might look, just even in your imagination, since this really isn't starting till spring?
Sure. Yeah. It's. I mean, the first thing is we're going to be very much in the rhythm of the news cycle. I mean, we're going to be writing important stories about things that people care about right now. So sometimes that'll mean stories that are pushing the conversation. There wasn't probably a moment in the last year when food stamps were on the tip of everybody's tongue in America, but when my colleague Eli Sasla wrote about food stamps in these beautiful narratives, people talked about them a lot. We're going to do some of that. But like this week, for example, the State of the Union speech, we knew that the president was going to talk a lot about income inequality in that speech. So one of the reporters on the business desk and I just worked on a very quick turnaround narrative just about the impact of the president's so far biggest policy on inequality, which is raising taxes on rich people, and what's that actually look like in the economy compared to the fears that we were told that it could look like. So very real issue, very on the news, but very much told with a human story.
Definitely. And I'm curious, Elise, do you have a take on what's going on at the Washington Post? I mean, obviously Ezra Klein departing was a big kind of hit, and we've seen, Brian Stelter left the New York Times, and Nate Silver left the New York Times. But now Washington Post Marty Barron comes out with his memo saying, 2014 we're going to be hiring this, we're going to be adding this blog, we're going to be beefing up here and there. I mean, what do you feel like how the Washington Post has kind of come out of all this? Oh, you just need to unmute. Sorry. Important.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm a tech reporter who doesn't really understand tech very well, like in a practical way. No, I'm really excited actually about what's happening on both fronts. One for individual news brands, the people like Ezra and Nate Silver and Glenn Greenwald, and being able to have a very low barrier to entry and strike out on their own news organization. I can't believe it's almost been 5 years now, but I was part of the launch of the Texas Tribune, which started from scratch and was an all-digital news organization that launched in 2009. And back then, I think we more traditional news journalists or folks that are from traditional news organizations were we're a little bit more risk-averse about making this leap and jumping. And Evan Smith and John Thornton, who started the Tribune, sort of made this argument that we're essentially assembling a Justice League or assembling an Ocean's 11 of news brands, because what we want to do is bring in reporters who already have followers and followings, and it seems like this has become more and more prevalent, and it's happening in huge waves now at the end of 2013 and 2014. On the flip side, the institutions and institutional news organizations haven't become unimportant or less important because they have trust, right? And it's all about trust with readers. Ezra Klein has trust of his fan base and his readership, and so he was able to strike out on his own. The Washington Post has many reporters, and as a news organization has that trust. And so I read with great interest that Marty Barron said that they were going to be on a hiring spree, and 2014 was all about digital expansion, and it seems like they're doubling down on blogs and other verticals. We're really excited to hear that. We've been very interested at NPR in verticals and in a similar way, just because there's so much interest in deeper dive contextual reporting that journalism organizations that can really have the resources to pay for that sort of reporting can double down on. So we're really excited.
And Andrew, I'm curious, is there a point where, it used to be that a young journalist might start off, doing either their own thing or at a small paper and maybe move up, and, your final destination was the New York Times or the Washington Post, but now it's kind of funny to think of those papers as being a place where people can kind of build their own brand and move on to something else.
Yeah, I think I'm quite encouraged by the development. I mean, it's interesting how the news world is now following the cue of the tech world and maybe the engineering world, right? This whole idea of a side team that can go off and work outside the boundaries of the traditional organization, almost like a Skunk Works or a spin-off, is really great. If you look back at Apple, Apple had a dominant product at the time, like the Apple II, and the Macintosh team was this team that could go off on the side and have a pirate flag and do all kinds of crazy things without the constraints of the original organization. So I think seeing this being applied to the news industry is quite good and refreshing. And when I saw a bunch of my students graduating from USC and Columbia and now at AU, I see a lot of them looking. The majority, I think, are looking outside the boundaries of either public radio or newspapers or TV networks. So Vox Media, hired some of my students. Some of these smaller outfits have been really attractive to them because they felt like they could really apply a whole breadth of skills, whereas if they landed at a traditional news organization, they were falling into a position that didn't allow them to exercise a lot of their talents there. So I think it's a great thing for journalism students as well.
Maybe this is a question for Claire, because being a student, do you want to start out at a newspaper, a traditional media outlet, or would you rather be at BuzzFeed or Vox Media or something that's completely outside of kind of digital native organization? I mean, where do you think, and what do you hear about other students doing too?
Yeah, this is something I'm thinking about as a senior, kind of purveying the journalistic field. And I think that a lot of students like me who are interested in journalism are really attracted to these digitally native companies where you get the sense that when you apply to a place that's a very established news company, that an entry-level reporter, you won't really be doing a lot of your own work. You'll be doing a lot of background work. So I think there's a sense that there's a lot more opportunity in digitally native companies, especially as young people. Everyone assumes that we have a lot of digital skills just by nature of being young.
It's true. What would you say about that, Jim? I mean, you guys are hiring a bunch of people, especially for your blog. Do you feel like you're still going to give kind of young reporters a bigger chance than maybe in the past?
I mean, I'm getting some amazing resumes from some really great young reporters, and I really hope that we can find, places for them in this. I'm not exactly sure how many hires I'm going to get, but I would love to hire some really great young people. I do want to say one thing, though, which is that I know a lot of young people and talk to them and mentor some of them about their careers, and I think that just like it was in the old days, there's a really wide range of experiences in all types of media. You can take a job for a digitally native place and get stuck doing a different kind of not doing your own work sort of stuff. You can do a lot of aggregation. You can get stuck not doing reporting and not building the skills that help you get a bigger job down the line. That happens to you at traditional news outlets, too. So when I talk to young people, the thing I keep telling them is look for places with good opportunity and look for where you can learn. Because so much of what we need in this industry, whether it's brand building or organization building, are just people who are willing to push limits, learn a lot, and find new and better ways to engage people and engage in the type of journalism that I think is our highest calling, which is really helping people understand the world around them better. So I'm glad that there are places like Ezra's and others that are clearly going to do that and are going to work with young journalists to build those skills. I'm also glad to work in a place that values that in its young journalists.
And Monica, what do you think about this kind of movement around with journalists establishing themselves, moving around? I mean, this stuff has been going on for a long time, but for some reason we keep reading more and more trend stories about these personal brands that have built themselves. I mean, there's something about the online and digital arena that makes it somewhat easier, like a lower barrier to entry in some ways as far as starting your own thing, whether it's with the help of a traditional organization or not. It just seems like there are more potential possibilities, I mean, from the age of blogging onward, of someone really starting their own thing.
Yeah, I think, I've been thinking as I'm hearing everybody that the Newsroom, the HBO show, is so out of date.
Oh, it's terrible.
The excitement about journalism is it's not on the cable TV wars anymore. It's not on anything print-related, really. It's in this incredibly hot arena that exists somewhere between these newfangled, well-funded, well-thought-out digital, organizations like Vox Media, and places like the Washington Post and the New York Times. The Post having Bezos's money, probably. I mean, I loved seeing the headline this week about newspaper expansion. Really? A newspaper is expanding? Yes, it just feels like this nice era. Not to mention, I think that in the last several years, as journalists, we've not really known who our heroes were. Our heroes used to be the TV news anchors. They used to be, the top columnists at newspapers. And there was just a time when we lost our heroes, and we just felt kind of a drought of ambition, I think, coupled with a bit of sort of excused cluelessness throughout the industry. Like everyone, it's okay if nobody really knows what they're doing because we all don't know what we're doing. And I think we're now coming into a time when, no, we know who our heroes are. They are Ezra Klein and they are Nate Silver and they are all these other journalists who embrace some of the principles of digital journalism. And who's the media critic at the New York Times? He put it really well.
David
Carr.
Yes, David Carr said that great digital journalists publish everything they learn all the time. And they integrate things like numbers and context. I mean, Ezra's sort of mission statement for the new site he's putting up at Vox was, we've always news has always been about what's new, and there's not really been a time to explain everything that's going on and everything that's happened before. So there's this ambition to come back to some of the principles that have always been there in journalism. And there's this energy, and there's this money, from crazy, really rich people like Jeff Bezos. And this is just a really exciting time. And I think we have our heroes. We have some really good competition. We have intensely interesting ideas. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping students absolutely understand that. I think there's a new path coming out. You used to be told in journalism schools that, well, first you got to get a job in a local market, small market, and then climb up to the big markets. And now it's like there's a second path. Or you can, place your bet on some small digital news startup you're lucky enough to get in on, and that could be your path to stardom in this industry. So it's fascinating, but yeah, the last few months have been a very, very exciting time for just the morale of the whole industry.
I should point out, though, while that this is a great time for ideas and experimentation and entrepreneurship, I don't think any of these new organizations have solved the revenue question of how journalism in and of itself can make money, because they're all essentially funded by people who made millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars on eBay or from being Steve Jobs' wife in her funding of Ozymandias, that new site. And so it still will be an interesting terrain over the next couple of years to figure out how these organizations actually do end up trying to make money through the selling of their product. I'm watching First Look Media, the organization out from Omidyar, and they're planning on starting a side tech company that seems really interesting in that they're going to, and I don't want to sort of misrepresent what they're planning on doing, but all I know is that there is some sort of tech company in which they're going to try and spin out products, and so that's going to be really interesting to watch, but the revenue question does remain.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like you're a little skeptical. I know David Carr in his story said, these are the new these will become the new legacy media companies, Vox and BuzzFeed and all these other ones, but they have a long way to go. Is what you're saying, Elise?
Yeah, we're still in early days.
Yeah, it makes sense. Andrew, you had some thoughts about Ezra's new, I guess it's called Project X, that he's doing for Vox Media.
Yeah, the job posting that they have up on Vox Media is for Project X, and I was pretty impressed, astonished to see his job posting, which got very specific, but I think they were very specific simply to show that they're really looking for a dream team of programming, news junkie, multimedia savvy, ambitious entrepreneurial types to join their venture. So they said, we'll need D3 hackers and other data viz geniuses who can explain the news in ways words can't. We'll need video producers who can make 2-minute cartoons that summarize the Volcker perfectly. So it's not only like domain experts, but people who know what D3 is. Not a lot of people know what D3 is, which is like a data visualization package for JavaScript. I mean, it's pretty high end.
So Jim, were you guys demanding some sort of cartoon knowledge if you're gonna come on as a visual person at your blog?
Not just cartoons. I think we're also demanding a variety of your ability to invent breakfast cereals and other things. I mean, we're really going to get full sensory. But no, it's exciting, right? Like I've got the data people who are applying to me have coding skills and other things, and we've just got to be thinking all the time about how do we engage different readers. And they're thinking about it. I know Nate's thinking about it. We're thinking about it. And I think that big legacy media companies are going to have to lead the way, or we're going to lose on this stuff.
It makes sense. Well, thanks, everyone. I appreciate you joining us for the show. We'll definitely be following what you're doing, Jim. You're going to launch this spring, so it sounds like there's a lot in store for 2014 at the Post, and we'll definitely follow what happens with Ezra Klein and Project X, his skunk works within Vox Media, which promises to be, even more interesting than Wonk Blog, according to him. But we'll see how this all plays out. It'll be fascinating to follow. So I want to thank our roundtable, Andrew Lee at American University, Claire Groden, Mediatwits intern, Elise Hu from NPR, Jim Tankersley from the Washington Post, and Monica Guzman from Seattle Times. We'll catch you every week, Friday mornings on PBS MediaShift at mediashift.org. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.